There are mornings that split a life into two halves, the one before and the one after. For Margaret Ellison, that morning began like every other. Rooster crowing. Fog sitting low over 40 acres of Oregon farmland. Coffee going cold on the porch rail, because there was always something more urgent than drinking it hot. She walked out to check on the east fence line, the one bordering the old logging road that separated her land from the Hendrick Valley Winery. And she stopped. Because where there used to be an empty field, there was now a mountain. Not dirt. Not hay bales. Barrels. Oak wine barrels, stacked and toppled and scattered across nearly 2 acres of her property, some split open, some leaking dark red stains into the soil, some crushed under the weight of others thrown carelessly on top. 800 of them. She didn't know that number yet. All she knew, standing there in her boots with her coffee mug frozen halfway to her lips, was that someone had turned her land into a dumping ground overnight, and she was about to find out exactly who. This is the story of how a farmer's fury became a fortune. How a woman nobody expected anything from turned 800 pieces of garbage into an empire built with her own 2 hands. This is the story of Margaret Ellison. To understand why this hit her so hard, you have to understand what that land meant to her. Margaret had inherited the farm from her father 11 years earlier. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't profitable, most years. It was hay, a few dozen sheep, a struggling apple orchard, and more debt than she liked to admit to her sister on their Sunday phone calls. But it was hers. It was the one thing in her life that hadn't been taken from her, not after the divorce that emptied her savings, not after the bank almost foreclosed in year 3, not after 2 years of drought that killed half her orchard. She had fought for this land. Bled for it, in the literal sense, more than once, from barbed wire and broken machinery and her own stubbornness. And now Hendrick Valley Winery, the sprawling, glossy operation 2 properties over, the one with the tasting room and the wedding venue and the Instagram-famous rows of vines, had used her land as their trash heap. She called them within the hour. The receptionist put her through to someone named Trent, an operations manager who sounded like he was eating a sandwich while he talked. "Yeah, we had some barrels that needed disposal. Contractor said that lot was cleared for waste." "That lot is my property," Margaret said, her voice flat and dangerous in a way she didn't recognize in herself. There was a pause. A very long, very expensive pause. "You'll do more than look into it. You'll have those barrels off my land in 72 hours, or I'm calling a lawyer and the county both." He hung up without confirming anything. 72 hours came and went. Margaret drove into town, into the winery's gleaming parking lot with the fountain and the string lights, and demanded to see whoever was in charge. She got a manager named Diane, who was polite in the particular way people are polite when they've already decided not to help you. "Our disposal contractor made an error," Diane said. "We take full responsibility. But removing 800 barrels is a significant logistical undertaking, and honestly, Ms. Ellison, at this point it may just be easier and faster for everyone if you kept them. We can offer you a small settlement for the inconvenience." "A settlement? Say, $2,000. Margaret almost laughed. $2,000 for 2 acres of ruined pasture, oak splinters in her sheep's hooves, and wine-stained mud that would take a season to fully drain. She didn't take the money that day. She went home instead, and stood at the edge of that barrel mountain until the sun went down, trying to figure out what in God's name she was going to do with 800 oak barrels she never asked for. Meanwhile, the barrels sat there, rotting in some places, attracting wasps, taking up land she needed for grazing before winter set in. Her sheep wouldn't go near that section of the property anymore, spooked by the strange wooden shapes looming out of the fog. This was, by her own later admission in interviews, the closest she came to giving up on the farm entirely. She sat on her porch one night with a legal pad, doing math that refused to work out in her favor. Feed costs, vet bills, the mortgage payment due in 9 days. And now, cleanup costs for a mess she didn't create, because apparently the burden of someone else's negligence had become hers to carry. The weight burdens always seemed to land on the people who could least afford them. Her sister called that night. Margaret almost didn't pick up. When she did, she didn't cry. She wasn't a crier, hadn't been since her father's funeral, but her voice cracked in a way her sister noticed immediately. "Maggie, what's wrong?" "Nothing. Just tired." So she told her. All of it. The barrels, the lawyer she couldn't afford, Diane's insulting $2,000 offer, the sheep that wouldn't cross their own pasture. Her sister was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that Margaret would repeat, almost word for word, in every interview she ever gave about this story afterward. "Maggie, you've spent your whole life turning garbage into something that works. That farm was garbage when Dad left it to you, and look what you did with it. Stop asking what to do with the barrels you didn't want. Start asking what you could build with the barrels you have." Margaret didn't sleep that night, but not because she was upset. Because for the first time in 3 weeks, her mind was racing towards something instead of away from it. The next morning, she walked out to the barrel field with a hatchet, a notepad, and a coffee that actually stayed hot long enough to drink. She split one barrel open, then another. The oak inside was rich, dark, stained deep red-brown from years of holding wine, the kind of aged, character-heavy wood that people paid a premium for in furniture stores. She'd seen barrel furniture before, in a boutique shop in Portland once. A coffee table made from a half barrel, price tag nearly $800 for a single piece. 800 barrels. If even half of them were usable. She wasn't a carpenter. She'd never built furniture in her life beyond a wobbly bookshelf in her 20s. But she'd spent 11 years fixing fences, patching barns, rewiring pump systems by trial and error and YouTube tutorials. She knew how to learn with her hands. She called the winery back the next day. "I've changed my mind about your settlement," she told Diane. "Oh, wonderful. I'll have the paperwork." "I don't want the money. I want the barrels. All 800. In writing. Free and clear, no strings, no take-backs. You dumped them, they're mine now, and you will never ask for a single one back." There was a pause. Margaret could practically hear Diane doing the math on legal fees versus a free write-off. "I suppose that could be arranged." It was in writing by Wednesday. The next 4 months were the hardest physical work of Margaret's life, and she'd spent a decade wrestling sheep and hauling hay bales. She taught herself barrel disassembly from online forums written by hobbyists in Kentucky bourbon country. She burned through 3 sets of cheap hand tools before investing in a used table saw she found on a classified site, paid for with money she scraped together by selling 2 barrels of scrap wood to a local pallet company just to get initial cash flow moving. Her hands blistered, then calloused. She learned the hard way that not every barrel is salvageable. Nearly 100 were too rotted or cracked to use for anything beyond mulch and kindling. She learned which staves held their curb best for a table edge, which rings could be repurposed as decorative trim, which lids made the cleanest tabletops with the least sanding. She built her first piece, a simple round coffee table from a barrel half, with a thick glass top she special ordered to protect the wood, and it sat in her living room for 2 weeks because she was too afraid to try to sell it. Her sister was the one who finally pushed her onto a local marketplace app. Margaret posted 3 photos and a description that undersold the piece badly. Barrel table, handmade, $150 or best offer. It sold in 4 hours. To a woman 2 towns over who drove out personally to pick it up and asked, almost immediately, "Do you have any more of these? I have a whole guest house I'm redoing." Margaret said yes before she'd even built a second one. Word moved faster than Margaret expected, the way it does in small farming communities, where everyone half knows everyone else's business. The story itself became part of the marketing without her even trying. The woman whose farm got dumped on by the fancy winery down the road, who turned the whole mess into handmade furniture. People loved an underdog story, and this one had a villain built right in. She opened a simple online shop, photographed each piece against the weathered red barn on her property, leaned into the rustic authenticity because it wasn't a brand aesthetic for her, it was just her actual life. Real farm. Real barrels. Real oak stained by real wine that had actually aged in that actual wood. Orders started coming faster than she could build. She brought on her nephew, out of work after a factory closure 2 counties over, to help with sanding and finishing. Then a retired carpenter from town who'd heard about her through the diner grapevine and offered to teach her joinery techniques in exchange for barrel wood for his own hobby projects. A regional lifestyle magazine ran a feature. Then a local news segment picked it up, with the headline practically writing itself, "Farmer Turns Winery's Trash into Treasure." The segment aired the same week Hendrick Valley Winery was dealing with an unrelated PR issue about wastewater runoff, and the timing did her business no harm whatsoever. Diane from the winery never called again. But Margaret heard, secondhand, through a mutual acquaintance, that the winery's owner had been furious to see his own dumped barrels immortalized as a viral local success story, essentially converting his negligence into someone else's advertising campaign. Margaret found that she didn't mind that image one bit. By the end of the second year, Margaret Ellison's farm was still a farm. She never gave up the sheep, never sold off the orchard, but it was also something else entirely. A workshop had gone up where the old equipment shed used to be. A small team, 5 people now, cut and sanded and finished barrel wood into furniture that shipped to 22 states. The number that made the local paper run a follow-up piece was this. In her second full year of operation, Margaret's furniture business crossed $140,000 in revenue. Not life-changing money by the standards of a tech fortune, but life-changing money by the standards of a farm that had nearly gone under 3 separate times in the previous decade. She paid off the mortgage that had haunted her for 11 years. She replaced the roof on the barn. She hired her nephew full-time, at a wage that let him buy his first truck outright. And she kept about 40 of the original 800 barrels, unsplit, arranged in a decorative row along the very fence line where the winery had first dumped them, not out of sentimentality exactly, but as a marker. A monument to a specific kind of stubbornness. A reminder, every time she walked that fence line, of exactly what she'd built, and exactly what it had cost to build it. She talks about her sister's phone call. About how the actual turning point in her entire life wasn't the winery's mistake. It was the moment she stopped asking what to do about a problem, and started asking what she could build from it. "Nobody hands you the barrels," she says, in the interview clip that gets shared the most. "Sometimes life just dumps them on your land and drives off. What you do next is the only part that was ever up to you." The winery, for what it's worth, eventually put up a small sign near their property line reminding trucks and contractors to confirm disposal locations before dumping. Margaret has a framed photo of that sign in her workshop office, right next to her very first coffee table sale receipt. $150. Best offer accepted, the beginning of everything. 800 barrels. One furious, exhausted, nearly broken farmer. And a fence line that still, to this day, holds 40 barrels standing guard. Not as trash anymore, but as proof. Some stories are about winning. This one is about something a little different, about refusing to let someone else's carelessness define what your land, your life, and your labor are worth. Margaret Ellison didn't ask for 800 oak barrels, but she built an empire out of them anyway. Maybe this story is for them.